welcome back to another fabulous confabulation with me, Jay Mills. I'm so happy that I get to do these again, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Madinah Brown-Day. Now, she is a licensed clinical social worker, and she owns a private clinical practice named Beacon of Well with her husband. They are specialized in treating depression, trauma, anxiety, and so much more. So, hi, Madinah. How are you?
Hi, Gina. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for coming and talking with me on my blog.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
No problem. What kind of license do you need to be a therapist?
Well, every state is different.
Okay.
But here in New Jersey, in order to work as a therapist, you need to be licensed legally. So in my case, I went to undergrad school. I got a degree in psychology. Some people may get degrees in social work, actually. And then I went on to graduate school, and I ended up getting a graduate school degree in social work, master's of social work degree. After graduating, I took the licensing exam, and I became what's called an LSW, licensed social worker.
Okay.
And that allowed me to be able to start to do some of the clinical work, but I needed to be supervised under what's called a licensed clinical social worker, which is what I am now.
So, wow, wonderful. So now, how would you describe mental illness? Like, what is it?
Well, there's so many different forms of mental illnesses.
Okay.
But the best way to describe it is when somebody is having an emotional disturbance that keeps them from being able to function in their day-to-day life. So someone who may find it really hard to feel happy or to just feel comfortable or good or calm, relaxed, to the point that it's becoming a real difficulty in their life. They may not enjoy some of the things that they normally would. They might start to isolate away from people. Things like that. And there's subtle things people don't really always recognize, because a lot of times when people have these types of emotional challenges, they're still functioning. People see them all the time.
Right.
Sometimes, these same folks may be known to be the life of the party or the class clown, but inside they're really not feeling very well.
Right. And I know this is something that a lot of people talk about now. Like, okay, when I was first getting into college, we had a lot of seminars on like mental health and all that. So why do you think it's important for us to talk about mental health?
It's extremely important, particularly in the urban environment and with people of color, because most of the time that it has such a taboo. It's such a stigma. It's very difficult for people to find help if they're not feeling well because of the attitudes a lot of times of family members, people in the community who just don't believe in mental health.
Right.
As people, we have a tendency to draw on our strengths, and we always have throughout history. So it's almost like to be seen as quote unquote broken in some way is unacceptable. Mm-hmm. It's unacceptable to be vulnerable in that way. So most people hide it because it's just not considered acceptable. It's not something that people consider as real.
Mm-hmm. I definitely feel like my generation is a lot more aware about it. Like, I don't know, like in friend circles and like in school, like we constantly talk about it. And I feel like that wasn't being done before then. And like, also, I've also talked to like older people who've said like, a lot of times their families would say that, like just pray about it if they were like sad or something like that. So I think it's very interesting, like how like, especially in the Black community, how people said you had to deal with depression, thinking it was just like something they would like it would bypass or something. So I think that's very interesting.
Yeah.
So what are some various forms of depression?
Okay, so one of the most common forms, which we were talking about, is depression. Very, very common. Millions of Americans suffer from depression. So there's various forms of depression. There is the type of depression where you can function, go to work, go to school, you do your day-to-day activities. You just don't feel well. You don't remember what it's like to feel happy. There's that type of depression. And then you have the type of depression that's more serious, more of major depression would be considered a person who would have a real difficulty with going to work, with going to school, with just maybe getting up in the morning to be functional, having a very difficult time focusing, staying focused. A lot of times people walk around in a fog, so they may tend to isolate a lot more. It may be a little bit harder for them to even hide how it is that they're presenting. People that are in that state, you can physically see that there's something that's not right. But sometimes people will look at it and say, "Oh, that person's lazy." That you hear that a lot. "Oh, they're just lazy." If they would you just got to get it together. You got to pull yourself together. You can do it. Just get up, get motivated.
You could do it.
Yeah, you get motivated and it'll be fine.
Right.
But oftentimes when you're saying that way too often, get motivated, stop being lazy, you got to look at it as being a little bit more than just motivation or laziness.
It's easier said than done, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And those are symptoms.
Okay.
Those are symptoms. And then there is the more intense form of depression in which people start to have suicidal thoughts. They may even have homicidal thoughts, which means they want to harm other people. They may get to the point where they start to hear voices. If people lose sleep for more than 3 days, it's anybody, a healthy mind starts to see things, hear things, that sort of thing, having what would be called hallucinations, auditory, visual hallucinations. So oftentimes people who have extreme forms of depression can become what's called psychotic, which means they have a complete break with reality. And then you have, and you hear this one a lot. People will say bipolar. That person's very bipolar.
Yeah, we throw that word around a lot.
Yes. And usually what they're talking about is the person may be pretty angry or aggressive at times, or they seem really, really up or intense, and then they've got other times where, it's looking like they may have another personality attached to it, a little down. In reality, we all have mood swings.
Right.
Bipolar disorder, though, is when somebody has their mood swings, but they're mood swings that may be more consistent.
Okay.
So it's and not necessarily the situation doesn't fit the mood swing. Okay, so people can have mood swings and they may be upset about particular things or having a bad day, or they're just thinking, and they're mood swings.
Right.
And sometimes hormonal, people can. But with bipolar, what you're really talking about are periods of what's called mania or hypomania, and periods of depression, or at least a period of depression.
So those two are tied.
So they're tied. So, and then there's other schizophrenia, depression, bipolar are the main three. There's so many different. Literally, we have a book that has so many different other types, but anxiety would be the next one.
Okay.
And anxiety, if we're talking about the major ones, is probably one of the most common as well, next to depression, because usually with depression, you have anxiety. It's usually, it commingles a lot of times.
But can you have anxiety and not have depression?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. The only reason that it may turn into a depression is because when a person's, it's almost like when your mind is working really hard, and in anxiety, you usually are not turning off your mind very
Right.
well.
Right.
After a while, when your mind is working so hard, it can become depressed because it's not getting rest. There's constant worry that's attached to it. So that's the reason why people may start to have depression, not to the point that they're not functioning. They may function, they just may not feel right. They may not feel well and not really understand. But anxiety is when you have constant worry or some feeling of angst that something bad is going to happen. And there's not necessarily a reason that you can put your finger on for it. It's a feeling that people have, and there could be a situation that a person starts with anxiety, and but not really. They're not really able. They're sort of generalizing everything, to anxiety. Sometimes there isn't any reason. It's just people. They may have a predisposition.
So now, are there levels to anxiety? Like, can it get to a dangerous point like the other mental illnesses?
Anxiety can become very dangerous in the sense that, remember I mentioned about, your mind not being able to turn off. Because it can get to a point where people can start to become paranoid, believe things that are not necessarily true. They can start to develop phobias. So some of the things, you hear about people who are afraid to go outside, or who may be afraid of bugs, or they may just have a generalized sort of anxiety. A lot of times, phobias are sort of born out of anxiety.
Okay. And so speaking of therapy, like, is that where people should go if they have a mental health? Like, who is the first person people should go to when they feel like they have some mental health issue?
I would hope that the very first person that someone would go to is somebody that they trust, that they feel that they can talk to about how they're feeling. So if, say, for instance, and I know a lot of your viewers are young women, it could be a trusted, it's wonderful if you can talk to a parent because you need a support. So I always say in connecting to someone and letting them know who's close to you that you're not feeling well, so that you have an extended support. You can start to build support around how it is that you're feeling. A teacher, it can be a mentor, it can be anybody, coach, it can be anybody that you feel really close to. But the second, if someone is feeling, for instance, depression, or feeling, like they don't want to live, they are just feeling hopeless. And we'll talk about the telephone numbers for suicide prevention, the national numbers. But I would say reach out to a hotline so that you can immediately get some assistance and some support to talk to somebody who knows exactly what it is that they're doing. If you know of someone who's struggling with a mental illness and they don't want to live, or they're a danger to themselves, they're doing things, it's important to call. Every state is different. New Jersey is one of the states where we have crisis for children. We have crisis for adults. So we actually have crisis lines. But not every state has that. So one of the things that most people will do is they'll usually call the police, 911, and they will explain what the situation is in order for assistance, so that person, can be transported. But that's only in situations where there's a crisis. But in situations where you're trying to get someone help, again, the National Suicide Hotline is great. But also, most states have they are attached to what's called the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill. They're an amazing grassroots organization resource that can connect adults and children to resources if they don't know exactly where to go to.
So basically, if someone feels like they have a mental issue, they should talk to someone that they trust and that they're comfortable with. However, if it's immediate, then they should call a hotline.